Everybody, Corrie Thorne, the spiritual healer. Welcome to my podcast. This is the second episode that we have recorded. Me channel, but it takes a team to make this work come together. So thank you for joining me. As you can see behind me, this is my whiteboard. We call this my channeling board. How I process my messages sometimes come out this way. So I'm always unsure of where we even going this week. We never know where it's going. And it is about keeping it real. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm pretty freaking real. I share, if you're in any of my workshops, my training, is that I'm open, vulnerable, and whatever I have happening in the moment, I take ownership and responsibility for it, and I deal with it. I don't lay blame out into the world. I deal with wherever I am and acknowledge if it's worth putting any more effort into. So this podcast about keeping it real is about going back to looking at when I had to become lovingly honest with myself. And as we all know, we have a tendency to be able to tell ourselves like those little white lies. And yes, if you know Call It Bear and Read, I'm wearing Call It Bear and Read shirt from Oracle Palooza. And so I have been at several. And so about keeping it back to a little bit of ADD. So as keeping it back to the real of who we are and being honest with ourselves is that I had to take ownership and responsibility in my life, and I had to become lovingly honest. So I had to be lovingly honest with myself. I had to look at the victim stories, the victim where the victim why story. So why is this happening to me? Why am I here? Why do people treat me this way? Why do people do this to me? Why? And so those whys became a huge part of life. And you don't realize how many why victim stories do we have. And don't get me wrong, I am not discrediting victim stories. Victim stories are real. And yes, I have been a victim to some real emotional abuse, some physical abuse. And I do know about being a victim to the reality of what can happen out there. Hurt people. And so we have this energy of recognizing, though, in our own stories. I'm like, I'm not here to fix anyone out there anymore. I am done doing that. I have done that for years. It's that as the spiritual healer, I give the tools, the guidance that is needed, and my wisdom and knowledge that has worked for me, in hopes that you can find your way into healing yourself. And do I have the abilities to do other than that? Probably, but that's not for me. That's for somebody else. And so holding on to the essence of taking that ownership and responsibility and being lovingly honest with ourselves and those victim stories is that it's recognizing where you still have them and where they are still present in our lives. And right now we're in a world that has a lot of emotions and a lot of triggers and a lot of reacting and responding in some very unhealthy ways. And I'm not going to be picking sides and choosing sides or laying blame out into the world, because I've gone way beyond that. Even with the people in my life, I look at my life and my life only, and how I want to be in my life, and I leave the rest out there, and I show up where I feel I need to be, and I do things in a much more quieter way, and that's what suits me. And you're going to find out more as we go through the story why. At around 32 years old in my life, I discovered that I was becoming a victim to my own health issues, that I discovered something more that was happening within my life. And I found myself at a very pivotal peak in my life, where I owned a big salon, spa, had massive employees starting to come in. I was training a lot of hairstylists and hiring a lot of people to work within a lot of the industries in hair, aesthetics, massage, healing. We even had tattoo, piercing. We had everything happening within this big 3-story salon and spa. My shoulders were hurting. I kept pulling my shoulder out. And then I noticed I had a twitch in my thumb, and my one thumb. Sorry, you're going to hear a dog behind. Told you, it's all about keeping it real here. And so I had a twitch in my thumb, and the thumb was starting to move. And within months, it was just like I could barely get up over the steps. I went from being so fit, so active, working out every day, and not being able to barely breathe. Like I could not barely move. Every time I go up and down the steps, I couldn't vacuum no more. Like it was like everything was just exhausting. I found myself not being able to even like fold things, to put things together. I would fall up and down stairs. It was unreal. It was just like all of these things started to happen. Well, of course, I started to get depressed. I come to know that I was already in the depression, but this was where the problem began. I was never honest enough with myself. I was never caring enough about myself to really look at where my life really was and what position I was really in and what was happening within me, within this empire, this castle, this self that is a temple and that we're supposed to care so much about. And I start to see doctors and they diagnosed they didn't know. And then it was fibromyalgia. And then it was just, you're just tired or you're just depressed and you just have this and you just have that. And I'm like, but this don't explain so many other things. So in that time, I had to take ownership and responsibility for my own life. I had to do something different than I was doing before. I recognize that me sitting at home and pushing myself and crying for half a day and then working and pushing myself 15 hours a day, showing up at work, putting on a fake smile, pretending I was all well, wasn't working no more. That was not going to cut it. So I had to really start looking deeper. I found a dear friend who became my Reiki master teacher, and she started to train me. And first thing she said to me, she said, well, you take on everybody's energy. Like you absorb everything. And in the process of taking all of my levels, becoming a Reiki teacher myself and falling in love with working with the energy, falling in love with that, I found another way to help people. And this was where some of the problem came in. I was already working 15, 16 hours a day. I was a hairdresser. I was an advanced esthetician. I was now adding in more diplomas, more education, more of something else that I could be of service to everyone else. So everything that I was learning, I couldn't wait to get out into the world and give to somebody else. I was not taking this healing and allowing it to do the healing work on me. What did I become? The wounded healer. Took me years to recognize this. Up until not long ago, actually, I became the wounded healer. And so then I would take this work and everything I did, I just couldn't wait to share it with the world. I love to share everything. I love to give people what I have. I love to give people love. It's like, just like I want everybody to have everything. And in the meantime, same thing. Everybody would give me whatever they had, good, bad, and the ugly. And some people were in a very ugly state. Some people would give me some of the not so nice things about them by lashing out at me, and I would hold on to that. And that's where some, within your safe zone, it's like when you're trying to relax or when you're quiet or when somebody else is like, that energy comes pouring in and it's never released. You never let it go. It's never done. And you find yourself in a really unhealthy place. And I did not want to be honest with myself about that. Then I moved forward into past life healing. I did all these other things. I just kept going and going. I found out all this past life healing about myself. In that time, in the past life healing, and I became certified in that, of course, I discovered that all of this that was happening here was punishment. I'd become the victim of my own story. Prior to this story, prior to losing this, prior to constantly trying to perfect life, trying to run so far away from myself, trying to run away from the person that you can't get away from, trying not to let anybody see this shame story, this self-betrayal, how I betrayed myself, how I betrayed this other part of me. And what I recognized was that a couple years before that, I had made a decision in my life that changed my life. And this was one of many. Once I opened Pandora's box, there was no going back. There was no going back, and I could no longer just sit in saying, oh, well, that was okay, this and that's fine. Is that I realized how many more of these stories where I sold myself short, or I gave up, I gave into, because of fear, gave into somebody else's insecurity or pleasing somebody else and lose me. And I would just say, it's okay, so that I would avoid the conflict, the fight, the arguing. I would sell myself short, and I would become a victim to my own circumstances, my own choices, my own decisions, to not be the advocate for my own life, to not stand tall enough and say, that's not going to serve me. But out of fear, with being threatened, with being told by people who probably would have done nothing. It's like those times in your life put you in such a fight or flight brain. And I recognize now how much in my life I spent in fight or flight brain. So keeping this real, what it was I had an abortion. You can be pro, you can be anti. I'm not questioning, and I'm not going to be on any side of saying who's right and who's wrong, because I don't do those things anymore, because I know what's right for me. And what's right for me may not be right for somebody else. So I have no right to judge anyone else and their choices and their decisions. And I always say I'm here for anyone who would like to ask me my story, and I'm here to share my story, but I'm not here to judge somebody else's story. And that's how you know you are truly spiritually growing up. My story was about abortion, but it was an abortion that came at a time in my life when I was well into my 20s, when I could have cared for a child, when it came at a time when there were so many things of why that should not have happened, but it did. And I already had a daughter who I loved dearly, and I'm an incredible mom. I made a choice that was against everything that was of my essence, of my core values. And it wasn't that I was even against the idea of anyone else doing it. But for me, I knew I could do this deep down. But I went against everything that my heart was telling me. And I became a victim to the fear story. And then after I told myself every story, I ran around those decisions, justifying my decision everywhere. It's like, oh, well, this could have happened and that could have happened and this and that and that. And it was like I never dealt with the fact that I was grieving. So that victim story became this like domino effect of my life. I fell into it. Then, during the past life healing, I started to awaken. And I started to awaken to my truth of how many times did I do this? How many relationships, how many places did I put everyone else before me? Was I of service to the insecurities? Well, how many times was I insecurity to bad behavior, to unhealthy relationships? And how many times did I have betrayed myself and sat in shame to make somebody else happy? That's a truth. And that's keeping it real. And so in that, this is the blessing. There's always the blessing. So the blessing was that I found all of this, and this became my life. Eventually the hairdressing had to end. Eventually I had to sell, well, I sold the shop to my mom, rented a chair, I continued for years. I built this business, still not being of service to me. Took me a long time to get this one. And eventually that health did take me down. Eventually it did get worse. And I've done all the health stuff you're supposed to do. It's like, do this, do that, don't eat this, don't eat that. And I did all that. I went to all the specialists, and it was a neurologist who actually said this to me. He said, Corrie, you're a life coach. You may have Parkinson's, you may not have Parkinson's. Right now, we don't have any physical signs within your brain. Go home and live like you have nothing wrong. Fix the things within you that you can do. And what's out of your control, let it go. Do what you can do. And that's all you can do right now. Find love. Be honest with yourself. And so being honest with myself and I awaken to the awareness of what needs to change. What needs to change my life? What do I need to start doing differently? Where do I need to start looking at my own story? How do I start taking ownership and responsibility for my own health, for my own life, and finding that presence? And it took a lot of questioning. It took a lot of self-help. It took a lot of coaching and self-actualization. And that's where More Than Existing started. Nobody was going to save me from myself. We become our own worst enemy We become the victim to our stories, to our circumstances. We are our biggest bully. We are our biggest critic. We are the most judgmental person in the world to ourselves. And when we're that miserable, we become it out there as well. And we find everybody to blame, everybody that looks like our mother, that represents our mother's story, our father's story, our friend's stories, everyone that represents someone, one little word. All they got to do is give one little word for us to be able to return to our self-prophecy story of how horrible people are, how horrible this person is. But in the meantime, we'll go into the whole hero story and the martyr story. But I do everything for everyone else. I'm so good to everybody. I take care of everybody, and nobody does nothing for me. And this is how everybody always treats me. Really? That is what we need to grow up from. That's what we need to break away from, because that is not serving us. And not every woman out there is your mother. Not every man out there is your father's story. Not every brother, sister is in your friend. Through the eyes of my so-called enemy, I see me. Through the eyes of everybody that treated me that way, I started to see my own actions, my own behaviors, my own things that I was doing. And I say, how dare anybody treat me that way? But then you look back at the places that you may have spoke to somebody that way, or the way you speak to yourself that way, and you see a whole world that you're living in, that you are creating your realities, and you're making those things comfortable for you to live in. And of course, I'm not talking, there's some severe things that I did go to counseling. I got a beautiful psychologist. I worked through those things. And she also was like this. She said, are you going to stop running around? Going to stop running around your story? Are you going to start dealing with this? And in the process of having to learn how to, speak, to not be shameful to speak because of my speech issues, because of I have a slower processing. So it's like there's a delay. And so it's like I have to process words. If I don't think about it, it's not so bad. But when you mention it, it becomes worse. And so I had to really start to build new neural pathways. I had to learn to hold a fork differently. I eventually couldn't hold my scissors. I eventually couldn't stand up on the one leg so much. But I kept fighting. Come to find out, I had much more than what I thought. A destroyed back. I have, things that were there. But advocate for my own health, I'm doing things to make life differently. I'm making the changes that I can make. At first, it started with taking off the 100 pounds of the overactivated, self-sabotaging shadow self that was protecting me. First, I had to deal with her, and I had to fall in love with her, and I had to fall in love with how I had gotten to where I was. I had to really look at her and recognize those shadows and just say, you know what? You're not really serving who I am today, but you did a great job protecting me. You did a great job keeping me safe. And from recognizing those changes and starting one step at a time, making those changes, I start to really learn more and more and more. And I start to ascend more and more into my work, and finding the guides, the angels, my channel, becoming, stepping into the way of my mystic. And I was born this way. So it's like I'm passed down generation of the ancestral, indigenous. And so finding my way into being the mystic, the channel that I am, is that I found the power of I am. And the power of I am truly takes away that, with no ego to the victim story, with no fear to the left to the why, that moving beyond that old story meant that I had to let the walls down. I had to slow down, think about what I was doing, and I had to look at the power of the I am in the big I am to those little tiny ego I am. I am hurt. I am this. I am that. I am empowered. I am strong. I am courageous. I am. And finding those, I had to start to believe those, because you can't just write them. It's one thing to say these things, but if you keep trying to convince yourself of something that you haven't yet allowed yourself to believe within you, you will crumble again. In More Than Existing, I call that the foundation work. You got to go back to basics. You got to go back to believing in you, and you have to first find you. Because the twin flame of your life is not out there. It is you. You are your twin flame. You are that relationship. You are your best friend. You are the everything. And it's the one relationship that we put the least amount of work in, and it's the one thing that we stop caring about, so that we can please others, so that we can nurture insecurity, so that we can belong, so that we can be liked, so that we can feel worthy, so that we can feel, like we are the martyr of the world, like we can save people, and we walk into a room and people know we're there, blah, blah, blah. Or we're hiding away from people because, the world is such an awful place, but it's not. There's still beauty. When you start getting honest with yourself and you start to see truth, that means that you have to be objective and subjective, and you have to look at both sides of every story. And then you have to think that every story is coming from a human who has experienced life on their terms or through certain ways. So our activation and our being activated, reactivated, being triggered is coming into the story. And the only real truth is beyond the veil. And that's the truth. And so you got to be willing to look beyond the story that makes you comfortable, no matter what. And that includes your own. And from there, it was about moving into, how do I see these changes happening? How do I see, how do I see myself moving beyond here to there? What is one action step I can start to take? What is, where do I see myself in 3-4 months? Where would I like to see myself? How will that start looking for me? Well, now you're starting to think creatively. Now you're stopping to pause. Now you're stopping to look at life. I had to stop and look at life. And it was my health that made me stop and look at life. It stopped me in my tracks, took me fully out of my one career. And I had to advance into, allow myself to fall into this one. I had to have faith. I had to have faith. And having that faith to move into this really, truly put me through some of my darkest moments, because in those moments, I had to face the depth of the darkness of me. And in the depth of the darkness of me, I found a hurt little girl. When we're searching for this, when we're doing this work, we find what we're seeking and searching is to go all the way back to the original source. So it's not to relive it again, not to find, it's just say, you know what? All of this path that was in my continual, always on repeat, there has to be a spot where this started. Mine went all the way back to 3. So the abortion story was just one of the stories. Forgiving everybody involved, easy. Forgiving me, hard, almost impossible. And it was like, and I called myself every name in the world, and I tortured myself. And then I start to recognize how many women I've been able to help since that story, without judgment, no matter what their decision is, without judgment, without them being criticized. How many spirits of little ones from the other side come through and help women heal who carry this shame, guilt, whatever it is, or they carry burdens, or they carry pain stories from the situation that brought them to having to make such a tough decision. Because nobody looks at the situation that brought that person to the point of having to make those tough decisions. We don't go that far sometimes. And so when we're looking at life, and it's like, from there, who's going to benefit if I become the, the hero of my stories? Me. Who else? Everybody around me, because no one has to listen to me become the bitch of the stories. It's like no one has to listen to me be complaining, gossiping, anything that we do. We get caught in our trauma responses so easy, and we get reactivated and triggered so easy. Becoming lovingly honest with ourselves truly starts to change everything. Today, where are you willing to start to be lovingly honest with yourself without beating yourself up, to look at your stories of the victim why stories, or the hero why stories, or the martyr why stories, of why we feel the need to always be doing this, why we feel the need to always do this as women. And this is how we begin to empower ourselves, because the only savior of your life is going to be you. And when you make yourself priority, when you put yourself up there as, as someone who is worthy to live a beautiful life, as you remember that this is a temple, and this temple needs to be cared for with such love, is that you look at yourself in the same light. It's the same care you would give for others, you start to give to you. And when you start to care for you again, life starts to change. This is about not just having compassion for yourself, say, oh, I'm so deserving of so much more, and then you do shit all for it. It's about doing the work. It's about saying, no, I care enough about myself to put in the hard work. I care enough to make the changes. I care enough to be dedicated and committed to me. And in the meantime, everyone else around us benefits. And that is the joy of keeping it real. And once you learn to start keeping it real, you become a whole lot less in the desire to be so trying to yell, scream, trying to convince the world to listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. You become a whole lot less of trying to be seen, trying to be heard, to being like over competitive, being selfish, being being caught up. And there's a difference in having to spend some time, cat. There's a difference in having to spend some time on you, and being a little selfish than being selfish to the point that you will crumble over anybody just to hold on to your self-prophecy story. Because trust me, I've had that done to me, and it hurts. That moment that you hold on to your story and you run around convincing everybody how awful somebody else is, how horrible somebody else is, because their words get turned to something else, or you held on something instead of dealing with it and asking that person to talk about it. It really truly becomes a self-prophecy story that becomes malicious. And when we start using manipulation, the motive to manipulate, the motive to set out to destroy, to destroy ourselves or to destroy others, we have issues and we need to deal with them. So that's being honest with ourselves, those areas of our lives, because my decision, my choice was that I was going to live a life that was more than just existing. And right now in the world, I feel like we're really slacking in that department. I think we really have gone backwards. I think we've lost a lot of our freedom. I think we've lost a whole lot of our sense of that we're here to live life. We don't know how long we have. And so why waste it on living in the past? Why waste it in being angry? Why waste it in staying in misery when we have the choice to choose? And I can tell you, all that come through spirit world, always their message for their loved ones is, live for me. If you could do one thing for me, live happy, live joyful, and live for me. Live for what I didn't get to live. And now, that is what I do. I take all of those experiences. Yes, it's still real. Yes, there's still stuff that's still real. And I don't hold any malice towards any one of the past, because they all still had their stories as well. And they were all going through their things. And this is the truth, though. This is us being able to keep it real, because it's my story. And in my story, I'm entitled to my story. And as are you. So I don't mean that our stories are not real. It means that who we are today is not the same person. And that is the difference. I really hope this helps you in some way this week in finding your way into lovingly being honest with you and into your way of more than existing. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.